It was a classic Trump power play, a punishing 35% tariff and a demand for a quick deal. He expected Canada to fold. Instead, in a move that has stunned Washington, Canada refused to be rushed. Prime Minister Mark Carney has called the president's bluff, weathering the storm with a bold strategy of economic defiance. Now, with Trump's ultimatum backfiring, the two allies are locked in a tense standoff. How did Canada turn the tables on President Trump's power play? The America First doctrine had a clear playbook: use overwhelming economic pressure to force partners into quick, favorable deals. The strategy was to create a crisis, apply maximum leverage, and dictate terms. For the Trump administration, any signed deal, was a political victory, a demonstration of strength. This became the standard operating procedure, the expectation for how allies were supposed to behave when faced with American power. But the relationship with Canada was always different. It wasn't just a trade partnership, it was a deeply integrated economic marriage. For decades, the unwritten rule was one of mutual respect and predictability. President Trump's transactional approach began to shred that foundation. The trade relationship became increasingly personal and erratic. The White House started linking trade talks to unrelated, highly charged political issues, from Canada's foreign policy to its minuscule role in the US fentanyl crisis. To Ottawa, this was a violation of diplomatic norms. To Washington, it was all just bargaining chips. This created a deep sense of mistrust in Canada, a growing fear that any deal signed under duress wouldn't be a stable foundation, but merely a temporary ceasefire in a permanent state of hostility. The stage was set for a dramatic confrontation, one that would pit Trump's demand for a quick victory against Canada's fear of walking into a trap. As the summer of 2025 wore on, the White House's frustration with Canada boiled over. The administration had a simple expectation: Canada would see the writing on the wall, accept a deal similar to what other allies had taken, and give the president a political win. When Canada refused to be rushed, the response from Washington was furious. President Trump began a public campaign of pressure, openly raging against Canada's perceived intransigence. The justifications became increasingly chaotic. He cited national security. He blamed Canada for the fentanyl crisis, an accusation Ottawa found baffling. It was clear that the specific reasons were less important than the overall strategy: to create an atmosphere of crisis and intimidate Canada into submission. This campaign of intimidation reached its climax on the last day of July. With the clock ticking down to his own August 1st deadline, President Trump signed the executive order. The threat became a reality. A new, punitive 35% tariff was levied on all Canadian goods not compliant with the USMCA. The move was designed to be the final, crushing blow. The calculation in Washington was that this immense economic pressure would finally break the Canadian resolve, forcing a desperate Prime Minister, Mark Carney, to accept any deal just to make the pain stop. It was the culmination of the Trump playbook, a move designed to demonstrate ultimate power. In Ottawa, there was no meltdown. There was a power play of a different kind. Prime Minister Mark Carney refused to take the bait. He calmly acknowledged the new tariffs, expressed his disappointment, and then unveiled a strategy of calculated defiance that turned the tables on the White House. The first and most crucial element was a public declaration that would define the entire conflict. A bad deal, Carney's team stated, was worse than no deal at all. This simple phrase was a direct rejection of Trump's pressure tactics. It signaled that Canada would not trade its long-term economic stability for short-term relief. This stance was immediately complicated by internal pressures. In Ontario, the province's populist premier, Doug Ford, called for a massive escalation, urging Ottawa to hit back with 50% tariffs on American goods. But Carney resisted this call for a full-scale trade war, heeding the warnings of Canadian businesses who knew that such a move would be catastrophic for both economies. Instead, Carney chose a more nuanced path. His government would absorb the hit from the 35% tariff while insulating the 95% of the economy protected by the USMCA. The strategy was to weather the storm, not to escalate it. The government focused on a long-term vision, aggressively diversifying its trade partnerships and strengthening its own domestic economy. It was a clear message to Washington. Canada was prepared to wait. This has created a bizarre and tense stalemate. President Trump has fired his biggest economic weapon, but it has failed to produce the desired effect. Instead of triggering a crisis in Canada, it has sparked a wave of national unity and strategic realignment. Canada is absorbing the economic hit while fundamentally re-engineering its economy to be less dependent on the United States. The White House is now faced with an opponent who refuses to play by its rules. Canada has called Trump's bluff, choosing to endure short-term pain in exchange for long-term sovereignty. The administration can keep the tariffs in place, inflicting continued damage on its own consumers and businesses, or it can back down, a move that would be seen as a major political defeat. The two neighbors are now locked in a war of attrition, a battle between America's raw power and Canada's quiet, stubborn resilience. Prime Minister Carney's strategy of playing the long game is a stand for national sovereignty, but that stand has a real-world cost. For a bicycle manufacturer in British Columbia, that cost is now threatening to put him out of business. His company builds world-class mountain bikes, a symbol of Canadian outdoor culture, but because he uses high-performance gear systems from outside North America, his Finnish bikes do not meet the strict rules of origin under the USMCA. Overnight, his business has been slammed with a 35% tariff. A single executive order from Washington has effectively erased his profit margin and threatens to make his bikes uncompetitive in the massive California and Colorado markets. He is now faced with a series of terrible choices. Does he try to find North American components that will meet the rules, even if they compromise the quality of his bikes? Does he abandon the American market entirely, a move that would force him to lay off half of his workforce? Or does he try to absorb the cost and hope he can survive until a deal is reached? This is the tangible consequence of the trade war. It's the paralyzing uncertainty that freezes investment and kills growth. While the politicians in Ottawa and Washington play a high-stakes game of chicken, it's business owners like him and the hundreds of people he employs who are caught in the middle. His story is a stark reminder that even a principled stand for a good deal creates economic casualties on the front lines. That Canadian bike maker's pain doesn't stop at the border. It flows directly south to an American small business owner who runs a popular bike shop in Colorado. For him, that Canadian brand is a top seller. His customers, serious cyclists, seek it out for its quality and performance. Now, because of a White House decision made 1,000 miles away, his reliable supply has been thrown into chaos. He gets a call from his Canadian supplier explaining that the new 35% tariff has made it impossible for them to ship their bikes at the old price. He now faces his own set of terrible choices. He can refuse to pay the higher price and lose a product his customers demand, leaving a hole in his inventory and sending his most valuable clients to a competitor. Or he can try to pass the 35% price hike on to his customers, who will almost certainly balk at paying hundreds of dollars more for the same bike. This is the boomerang effect of the Trump tariffs. The policy intended to punish a Canadian factory is now inflicting direct harm on an American one. It forces the US store owner to disappoint his customers, hurts his bottom line, and could even force him to cut staff hours. It's a perfect illustration that in the deeply integrated North American market, there is no such thing as a targeted strike. Every tariff is a bomb that causes damage on both sides of the border. A clash of wills has pushed North America into a dangerous new era. A US president demanding a quick victory has been stymied by a Canadian Prime Minister who refuses to be rushed into a bad deal. The result is a high-stakes standoff, with new tariffs in place and the trust required to sustain a partnership shattered. The continent's economic future is now hostage to a conflict with no clear end in sight. In the race to define the future, will North America win together, or will both nations lose by trying to go it alone? Are you American or Canadian? Share your story and your perspective in the comments below.